Joe Biden's war on climate change as a clear and present danger to America. What foolishness. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Did you know Joe Biden has channeled his inner corn pop and declared war on climate change? He's going to save not just America, but save the world. Thank you, Joe Biden. Climate change, America's clear and present danger, he says. Before I get into all that, I want to give you a quick rundown of all the places that you can now find Bold and Blunt. Go to edify.app, that is the online platform for your faith-based podcasts. Go there, download Bold and Blunt, and while you're there, check out all the other great offerings of faith-based podcasts that this platform has to offer. Of course, you can also get Bold and Blunt directly at washingtontimes.com. Go there, find my hyperlinked name on the site, click on it, scroll to the bottom of one of my commentaries, and there you will find easy directions on how to sign up for my 3 times a week washingtontimes.com newsletters. It gets delivered right to your email box Wednesdays, and Fridays in time for lunch hour. Includes all my commentaries as well as my twice weekly Tuesdays and Thursdays Bold and Blunt podcasts, which you can also get anywhere podcasts are offered. So Joe Biden, once again, channeling his inner corn pop, bringing out that warring attitude, has declared war on climate change. He is determined to save us because, as you know by listening to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the socialist with the mostest, we only have 12 years left of civilization unless we immediately stop driving cars and stop flying planes, unless you are part of that chosen few, the inner circle of the wealthiest and richest and most famous, who get to fly still and drive still because their mission in flying and driving is to go to locations to tell the rest of us in the world to stop flying and driving.
I come here today with a message. As president, I have a responsibility to act with urgency and resolve when our nation faces clear and present danger. And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
Literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger. And you thought that label was reserved for MAGA Republicans. But no, you would be wrong. Joe Biden also has another clear and present danger on his list of clear and present dangers to America, and that is climate change. Back to his speech from July, just a few weeks ago.
The health of our citizens and our communities is literally at stake. The UN's leading international climate scientists call the latest climate report nothing less than, quote, code red for humanity.
Code red.
Let me say it again. Code red for humanity. Isn't that a group of political officials, elected officials? These are the scientists.
These are the scientists. It's not just any old person saying that it's code red for humanity. These are the United Nations scientists. And as such, they must be taken completely seriously. And so when they tell us to stop driving and stop flying and stop eating red meat, for instance, because cattle, you know, God's creations, cattle are dangers to the climate. When the scientists at the United Nations tell us that we have to stop doing all these activities like eating meat and raising cattle and driving and flying, we must listen to them, pay attention to them, and do their will. Comply because it is code red time. Forget about the science of the last couple years that told us the only way that we could survive a virus was to completely shut down society. No going to business, no going to church, no going to school, no going to parks, no going out on the beach, no breathing within 6 feet of anybody without wearing a face mask. Not just one face mask, because if one face mask is good, 2 face masks are even better. Anthony Fauci, I am science guy, came out and told us that, remember. The scientists would have us believe that unless we listen to them, we're all fated to die tomorrow. if not today, unless we stop driving cars, flying airplanes, and eating red meat. As Bill Gates puts it, we need to start eating cleaner meat, like insects. Eat up your bugs, Johnny, or you won't get any dessert. I can imagine the dinner conversations that the youth of America are going to have round the table with their own families in the coming decade if Bill Gates gets his way. But again, it's the science, folks. You cannot argue with science.
Climate change is literally an existential threat to our nation and to the world. So my message today is this. Since Congress is not acting as it should, and these guys here are, but we're not getting many Republican votes, this is an emergency.
Oh, my goodness. Why does he keep saying literally an emergency, literally code red, literally a clear and present danger? Does he honestly think that if he adds these little exclamations into his speeches, that makes them stronger? Because really, if something's strong, if you have a strong argument, it stands on its own, right? You don't have to pepper it with all these code red, clear and present danger, literally. That's why when you read books, when you read novels, when you read nonfiction books, you don't see every sentence ending with an exclamation mark, because if it's truthful, it stands on its own, right? You don't need to constantly underscore, underline everything to make the case. The only people who do that are liars, right? Liars and deceivers and spinmeisters. They have to constantly. See what I did there? They have to constantly inject their narratives with these hyperbolic messages that they repeat as if it needs to be drummed into your head. Code red, code red, code red. I guess that's how it works with the low information voters. They don't get the gist of the remarks, and so what sticks in their heads are things like code red, emergency, and so forth. Well, that pretty much does describe most of today's Democrat voters, the low information types. And this is where Joe Biden really excels with his narratives. He drums into the minds of Democrat Party voters that if we don't obey the government at all costs and immediately and without question, that humanity is facing a code red and humans on a widespread basis will die. And this is where this White House's energy policy comes from. It comes from a position of hysteria. It comes from a position of selling climate change above energy security for the nation. Joe Biden's campaign plan, as a matter of fact, it's still out there on the internet. The Biden plan for a clean energy revolution and environmental justice. You know, I don't know about you, but really clean energy should stand by itself. It shouldn't be looped in with something fabricated by the far left called environmental justice. And really, clean energy at this point in time is not feasible for a widespread use. Otherwise, the free market would have picked up on it and run with it. Clean energy, alternative energy sources, and the like are all subsidized by the government, meaning the taxpayers, because, for the most part, they're not money makers for private industries to put forth. But aside from that, clean energy, the more this administration talks about clean energy and alternative energy sources and climate change, what they're really doing is bolstering China at the expense of America. And that's just bad national security policy. And I have with me today a guest who can speak at length about the damages that this administration is doing to America's national security because of their failures on energy policy and their failures to promote the idea of America first with energy. His name is Admiral Mike Hewitt. He's a retired Rear Admiral, actually, and he has a deep pool of experience dealing with national security issues, energy policy, and can speak at length about the importance of maintaining energy independence. He's here today to discuss. Admiral Mike Hewitt, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cheryl. Glad to be here.
So I wanted to talk with you first about energy independence because I understand that this is an area of expertise for you. How do you see America best becoming energy independent?
Well, I think under President Trump, we achieved energy independence, which was step one, so that we could maintain our own sovereignty with respect to energy. And it's proven itself when you become dependent upon your adversaries for energy, what happens, and you're seeing that play out in Europe right now. But moreover, I think the United States needs to be thinking about how it can help other countries become energy independent. In other words, I think energy dominance, electrifying the globe, addressing the massive food and water shortages, the population growth, the urbanization, these are all issues that are critically important to the planet. And the United States needs to stop thinking domestically about its energy, which I think we have made an over-reliance on renewables, and start to focus, how do we help the rest of the planet electrify itself? And so I think what you've seen in the last 6 months, thankfully, is that climate policy, which was driving the energy policy through the Biden administration, has now shifted to energy security. And with that, I think you're going to see the reemergence of fossil fuel use. I think you're going to see an acceleration of nuclear power. I think you're going to also see the fact that we can't burden the consumer with using less electricity. We have to understand that abundant baseload and clean power are critical to the planet. And frankly, the Russians and the Chinese have been thinking this way for a long time. So that's a long-winded answer to say energy independence is critical to our own national security, but moreover, we need to focus on our allies in the emerging markets so they can also become energy independent.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you just say that the policy of this administration in the United States has slightly shifted away from climate change as being the top concern and toward more acceptance of fossil fuels and so forth? Because if that is what you said, I still see Joe Biden beholden to the radical environmentalists.
So they're really struggling with their own confused policy right now. Up until the invasion of Ukraine, the word fossil fuel was verboten when you talked about the global market. As you know, we've made so many bad decisions with respect to our own energy, with the Keystone Pipeline and everything else. But the reality is, if you want our allies to wean themselves off of Russian gas, you have to give them an alternative. So the Biden administration has been quietly advocating for natural gas into Europe. They have been supporting other programs to help countries, particularly Ukraine, wean themselves off of Gazprom. But at home, they continue to talk about a commitment to renewable energy. And in many ways, those two things aren't squaring with each other right now. But quietly, you have seen a lessening of the attacks on the fossil fuel industry. We have a long way to go.
And how much do you think that can be attributed to the massive outrage in America over the rising costs of fuel at the pumps?
Well, what's interesting is that while we're seeing $5 a gallon gasoline over in Europe, they're seeing a tripling of their energy costs for electricity at home, as well as fuel for their cars. And in many respects, you're going to see rationing of energy throughout Europe this winter. And this isn't a surprise to anyone. This wasn't caused by the COVID virus, and it wasn't caused by Putin invading Ukraine. That just accelerated the reality that an overcommitment to renewable energy with the small capacity factors that come with wind and solar really put us at a disadvantage, and we created this energy poverty. The U.S. is feeling it at the pump, but we are in no way feeling it the way they are in Europe right now.
Do you think that we should be concerned under this Joe Biden administration that America will go the way of Europe before his 2+ years are up in the White House?
I think if we don't understand what's happening in Europe right now, and particularly the UK is probably a decade ahead of us in bad energy policy with respect to an overcommitment to wind and solar, no plan to rebuild its nuclear power industry up until last year, no natural resources, natural gas, excuse me. And the fact is, they did not calculate what it means to be dependent upon the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and Putin. If we don't understand the predicament that Europe is in right now, we are doomed to face it ourselves. And I think if you look at Texas alone with the heat wave this summer, what happened was the wind stopped blowing during the heat wave, so there was not enough energy to power the state. And when you start to ask people to turn off their appliances, when you start to ask people to not drive their cars, and you hoist the problem on the consumer, you obviously don't have the right solution. And unfortunately, I think that tends to be the strategy of the Biden administration right now.
What do you think about the statement that if renewable or alternative sources of energy could be feasible and profitable, the free market would have already developed them?
I think that's a very good point. I mean, the fact of the matter is, since the Paris Climate Accord, we have given the renewable energy industry unfettered access to capital, technology, innovation, and the private sector has been engaged with certain aspects of it, and it hasn't penciled out. The fact is, you can't fix capacity factor. In other words, the best you're ever going to do is 35 to 40% capacity factor from wind and solar. And when you create weather-dependent sources of energy, you're doomed to suffer the dependency on weather. And the fact is, the private sector, through ESG taxonomies, has done everything they can to materialize renewable energy, and it simply hasn't worked. I actually believe where the private sector can make real changes is to go back into smart uses of fossil fuel, accelerating nuclear power, understanding what it means to have abundant and baseload energy for industry, for innovation, for education, and then recognize that the Russians and the Chinese have figured this out, and they have been flooding the market with renewable energy. They themselves did not even attend COP26, and the Chinese built more coal-fired plants last year than ever before. They are hoping we make ourselves so dependent upon renewable energy that we have nowhere to turn but towards them.
Speaking of China, electric vehicles in concept sounds pretty cool, right? It sounds like a great idea, but is there any way, any path that you can see where we could make electric vehicles in this country cost efficient for Americans, workable, and not reliant, not putting us under the gun of China in terms of the resources that we would need to make them viable?
If I understood why the average consumer feels compelled to drive an electric car to reduce the carbon footprint on the planet, then it may make sense. But the fact is, shifting to electric vehicles doesn't decarbonize anything. And in some cases, it's not the right solution for the country. And ultimately, because of the need for the rare earth minerals and the ability to build out the batteries for these EVs that are required, you're going to be dependent upon China. And there is no scenario that I can see that the average consumer would buy an electric vehicle other than the fact that the price of gas is going up so high because of these overcommitment to renewable energy. You're almost forcing the consumer's hand. And ultimately, we don't have the natural resources. The planet doesn't even have the natural resources to build out the capacity for batteries that are required to make the EV market reliable.
So, and you may have touched on this in the first couple of questions that we went over, but do you see any changes America should be making in order to be energy independent, energy efficient, energy, clean, any type of energy changes we need to make in this country? Or should we just go back to the way things were under Donald Trump and stick with that?
Well, I think if we were to go back to the things that Donald Trump put into place, we would actually find ourselves with more energy, more reliable energy, new industries that require a lot of baseload power, and at the same time, we would be climate informed. In other words, what Donald Trump was doing was actually decarbonizing our energy mix, but he was doing it not through subsidies and legislation and heavy-handedness of the government. He was doing it by recognizing, first and foremost, I need abundant baseload power in my country. And if I achieve that goal first, and I drive down the cost of energy, I can invite new industries to my country, and the side benefit will be I will start to decarbonize the United States. The point being, and I think President Trump understood this, decarbonizing the U.S. doesn't solve the problem. The real problem is internationally, and we have to focus on providing abundant baseload power to our allies, who really are suffering from a lack of industrialization. And the fact is the Chinese have come in with the Belt and Road Initiative,
Yep.
and in many instances have displaced the United States as the country of choice for energy. And so I think what President Trump instinctively understood, get your house in order at home, and then have a program that's exportable to the international market.
Talk a little bit more, and I'm glad you brought that up, and I know we only have a couple minutes left, so, and this is a big topic, but the Belt and Road Initiative, talk a little bit more about where China is with that, and really what the ultimate end game is, because what's put out in the media sounds so much friendlier than what China really has in mind with that initiative, correct?
That's exactly right, and if you paid attention to the joint statement that came out of Beijing by Putin and Xi, just prior to the Beijing Olympics, where they made this grand statement about authoritarian governments are the new democracies, and that what Xi has been doing is not just a combination of the Belt and Road Initiative, where he is using predatory mercantilism to take over the debt of many emerging market countries that simply need the power, but he's also executing what's called unrestricted warfare. And in essence, unrestricted warfare is the doctrine by which they will win the war without ever firing a shot. And they'll do it in ways where they take over the politics, the economics, and they control the energy. This is exactly what Xi has been doing very, very aggressively. And of course, he's going to be reelected again as the leader for life for China. And if we don't pay attention to what they've been doing with the Belt and Road Initiative throughout Asia, Africa, South America, we are doomed to wake up one day and see that the Chinese are controlling most of our allies' energy and population growth.
And can you explain how the collapse of the U.S. dollar plays into that, or moving the world off the dollar as the currency?
Well, certainly, because what China and to an extent Russia are trying to convince the emerging markets is that you can't trust Western politics. You can't trust the traditional democracies of the U.S. and the U.K. And frankly, with all the attacks on President Trump, I think we've handed the Chinese the narrative that they needed. You can't trust our government right now because there's so much infighting and so much attacking of the other party that the Chinese are basically saying the democracies of the future are authoritarian governments because we don't meddle in your internal affairs. And all of this is leading towards a shift away from the U.S. dollar into other currencies. And I think this is exactly what the Chinese want to have play out. And we're actually handing them their own solution.
I'd love to have you come back on and talk just simply about that China initiative, because that could be a whole segment. But I just wanted to wrap with this one. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joe.
I just wanted to wrap with this one quick question. Regarding national security of America right now, we still have 2 years left of Joe Biden, and we still haven't overcome the perception of America as weak due to that withdrawal of Afghanistan. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel here with this administration when it comes to national security?
I wish I could see some light. I think the decision to leave Afghanistan, which was the worst foreign policy decision in my lifetime, set the conditions for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The aggressiveness of China in the South China Sea with respect to Taiwan has really been advanced because of the perception of American weakness. I think there are things that the Biden administration can do. A more robust support to Ukraine defending itself against Russia. I think the reality that Afghanistan was a failed decision. You did not need to leave Afghanistan. We had it fairly stable with 2,500 or so Americans on the ground. And the Chinese are being very aggressive against Taiwan right now. And the reality is the Chinese may see an opportunity to invade Taiwan. And if we don't change our strategy to convince them through a deterrence model that is a bad decision, I'm concerned that may happen. So we're firing behind the target right now. We have set the conditions for what I believe to be some very aggressive moves by Russia and China in the next 24 months. And I do think there are some things the Biden administration can do, but until they recognize the problem and some of the bad decisions they've made that led us to this point, I simply don't have any optimism that they are going to see through this problem.
Yeah, and they won't, because that would mean acknowledging mistakes and returning to strong leadership like Donald Trump gave us. So I really want to thank you, Mike, for taking your time on Bold and Blunt. You're a wealth of information, and I would love to have you back on to talk about the China initiative.
Cheryl, anytime. I appreciate all the great work you're doing as well, and look forward to chatting again.
Thank you. What a great guest, huh? I love having guests that really can give some insights into the importance of maintaining, let's just put it this way, a America First agenda in the national political arena. Unlike this White House that puts, I don't know, China first? Whoever first? World Economic first? World Economic Forum first? World Health Organization first? United Nations first? We don't know. Joe Biden's just up there reading the teleprompter, waiting for his ice cream break. Thank you for listening. I want to remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can go to edify.app and check out all the faith-based podcasts there. Bold and Blunt is among its offerings. You can also get Bold and Blunt anywhere podcasts are offered. And just one more quick mention. I have a new book out. It is called Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. It's available at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon, or at CherylChumley.com. Please check it out and find out what the far leftists in government have in store for America. And it doesn't look good. The ways that they are going to try and cripple and crumble America from within, you need to educate yourself so that you can fight effectively. I really want to thank you for supporting Bold and Blunt. Thank you for listening and subscribing. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.